Morning all. Alright, so the history videos continue. These really are some of my favorite videos to put together. And we're up to the 1947-48 season. Still original 6 era, of course, and the Toronto Maple Leafs have a really good regular season and a pretty darn good postseason as well. Toronto ends up finishing first in the league, 77 points, a record of 32, 15, and 13. 182 goals scored, 143 goals against, so scoring stays down. Sillaps is their captain. Hap Day is their coach. Detroit finishes 30, 18, and 12 for second place in the league with 72 points. 187 goals scored, 148 goals against. Sid Abel is their captain. Tommy Ivan is their coach. The Boston Bruins third in the league, but below 500, just barely at 23, 24, and 13, so they have 59 points. 167 goals scored, 168 goals against. Their captain is Milt Schmidt. Their coach is Dit Clapper, who played with these guys for 20 years. The New York Rangers finished 21, 26, and 13, so 55 points. They're back in the playoffs. This is the best record they've had in a while. 176 goals scored, 201 goals against. They're captained by Neil Colville, who is showing his ability to adapt as he's playing both blue line and up front. Frank Boucher is the coach. Montreal falls out of the playoffs. Rough year for Montreal. They finished 20, 29, and 11, 51 points. Don't feel too bad for them. They're not going to be down for very long. 147 goals scored, 169 goals against. They're captained by Bill Durnan. Yep, the goaltender. Dick Irvin is the coach. The Chicago Blackhawks, 20, 34, and 6 overall, so 46 points. Last in the league, but they're first in goals scored. 195 goals scored, but they're also worst in goals against with 225 goals going into their own net. John Mariucci is the captain. Johnny Gottslieg is the coach. So, the season starts with an all-star game, and it is for charity. It's a great idea. So what they have is they have the defending Stanley Cup champions from Toronto playing against a team made up of all-stars from the other 5 teams. But this is not your no-hitter kind of all-star game that we get now. In fact, the game is marred by Bill Mosienko suffering a fractured ankle. And so, it's career-threatening, and that will definitely, take some of the enthusiasm out of the game, because it really shouldn't be one where you see a guy get injured. Later in the season, Toe Blake has a similar lower body injury, ankle-ish, and so that ends his career. Toe Blake's career comes to an end. The punchline is done, and it's part of the reason why you see Montreal outside of the playoffs that season. Teams just have bad years. Like I said, they're going to be back. So, Max Bentley, who was the leading scorer in the NHL the year before, he ends up being traded to the Leafs because Conn Smythe doesn't like the start the Leafs are off to. Even though they're playing really well, he's not all that happy. So the trade which sees Bentley go to the Leafs, it's a 7-player trade. 2 going to the Leafs, 5 going to the Chicago Blackhawks. It's huge. Obviously, it doesn't benefit Chicago on the ice, but it definitely benefits Toronto. And it really gets their offense going. The Rangers, there's Billy Taylor, and for the Bruins, Don Gallagher. They are banned for life for gambling. Yeah, so there's a gambling ban right there back in 1947-48, and just they're gone. November 16th of 1947, New York Rangers' Don Rowley sets the record with 3 assists in 1 minute and 21 seconds of game time in a 4-2 win against the Montreal Canadiens. So again, the Rangers are getting better. We're finally seeing a good record for the Rangers, which over the last few years, anytime I mention something record-breaking in this section of the board, it's been bad for the Rangers. The league initiates a policy of players raising their stick when they score a goal or when they see the puck in the net. So when it's a goal, you raise your stick to signal that it's a goal. So that's why players do it all the time. And it's just, that's standard now. Well, they thought it went in, they raised their sticks. That's where it comes from. The Habs' Elmer Locke ends up scoring twice in the final game of the season for Montreal to win the scoring title, which any other season before this we would have said, and he ends up finishing first in scoring. But now there's an actual trophy for that. The Art Ross is born that season. The Wings production line is formed that has Gordie Howe, Sid Abel, and Ted Lindsay on it. It's going to lead to some great things for the Detroit Red Wings soon enough. As Detroit and Montreal are in for a big decade when we get to the 50s. Maurice Richard was hampered by a bad knee that season. He still ends up being one of the best players in the league. But between Richard's bad knee and Blake having a career-ending injury, yeah, it's going to lead to a pretty rough season. Bill Durnan, this year is the last year that we see a goaltender as a captain. And there was a previous year I looked at where I think there were 3 different teams had a goaltender as captain, but the NHL decides no. This just it doesn't work. We don't like it. No. And so captains cannot be goaltenders. That's where the rule actually changes, is that season. So because the C had just been placed on the jersey the previous year, not a lot of time for Bill Durnan to enjoy being the captain of the team. Maybe that's what it was. Maybe the NHL just thought Durnan was, being a little bit too happy and gloating about being captain. Anyways, I'm kidding, obviously. Elmer Locke does end up winning the Art Ross. He does end up finishing first and scoring that year. 60 games, 30 goals, 31 assists, 61 points. Barely above a point per game. So again, scoring is down. Buddy O'Connor for the Rangers, 60 games, 24 goals, 36 assists, 60 points. Doug Bentley for Chicago, 60 games, 20 goals, 37 assists, 57 points. Gay Stewart, part of that trade between Toronto and Chicago. He goes to Chicago, finishes the season with 61 games played, 27 goals, 29 assists, 56 points. Max Bentley going to Toronto. He loses a game, 59 games played, 26 goals, 28 assists, 54 points. Bud Poyle, one of the players going to Chicago in that deal, 58 games, 25 goals, 29 assists, 54 points. And Maurice Richard rounding out the leading scorers for this video, 53 games, 28 goals, 25 assists, 53 points. So he missed 7 games that season with the aforementioned injury. Turk Broda ends up being the number 1 goaltender for Toronto, of course, who finished first. 32, 15, and 13, so he plays every single game. 2.38 goals against average, 5 shutouts. Harry Lumley for Detroit plays every game as well. 30, 28, and 12 record, 2.46 goals against, 7 shutouts. Frank Brimsek in Boston, 23, 24, and 13, so again, plays every game. 2.8 goals against average, 3 shutouts. And Bill Durnan for Montreal, he plays almost every game, finishes 20, 28, and 10, 2.77 goals against, also with 5 shutouts. The Hart Trophy that season goes to Buddy O'Connor of the New York Rangers. The Art Ross, as mentioned, goes to Elmer Locke of the Montreal Canadiens. The Calder goes to Jim McFadden in Detroit. The Vezina goes to Turk Broda of the Toronto Maple Leafs. And the Lady Bing also goes to Buddy O'Connor of the aforementioned New York Rangers. Your All-Stars around the NHL that year, they don't agree with the Hart Trophy. First team All-Star down the middle is Elmer Locke of Montreal. The second team All-Star is Buddy O'Connor. It's one of those oddities. He's the Hart Trophy winner, but he's the second team All-Star. That's rare. You don't see that a lot. Maurice Richard is the first line right winger. Bud Poyle in Chicago is the second line right winger. On the left side, Ted Lindsay in Detroit is the first team All-Star. Gay Stewart in Chicago is the second team All-Star. And on the defense, 2 Detroit Red Wings are the first team All-Stars on defense. Bill Quackenbush and Jack Stewart. Ken Reardon of the Montreal Canadiens is the second team All-Star alongside Neil Colville of the New York Rangers. And it's the first time, and is this the only time that a player has been an All-Star at the NHL level on the blue line when they've previously been a first or second team All-Star in the NHL at any forward position? With Colville, it was second line center. Now he's a second line defense. That's pretty strong praise. I know it's a 6-team league and be a lot of, if it was a 30-team league, sure. But still, being on the All-Star team for defense when you've been an All-Star up front says a lot about Colville's game. Probably would have been a Selke contender every single year, would be my guess. So let's get into the playoffs. The semis, of course, you have 1 versus 3, 2 versus 4, as usual. The Rangers play Detroit. Detroit wins the first game 2-1 at home. They win the second game 5-2. The Rangers then win at home themselves. First 3-2 in Game 3, 3-1 in Game 4. Game 5, Detroit wins 3-1, and then they go to MSG and they win the last game 4-2 to win the series 4-2 and move on to the Stanley Cup final. Toronto plays Boston. At this point in time, it's not a great matchup for Boston. Toronto wins 5-4 in the first game in overtime. They win the second game 5-3. They then go to Boston and go up 3-0 with a 5-1 win. Boston does win Game 4, 3-2, before Toronto then closes it out 3-2 at home to win the series in 5. So we go to the Stanley Cup final. It is Toronto on one side of the ice and Detroit on the other side of the ice, as so often happens during this era. Toronto wins this one. 5-3 and 4-2 in games 1 and 2. And then 2-0 in game 3. And then the question likely would have been, so are we going to get a comeback like we see in these series between these teams? No. Toronto wins 7-2 in Detroit in game 4 to raise the Stanley Cup at the Olympia with a 4-game sweep. They only lose 1 game in the entire playoff run. Ted Kennedy finishes first in scoring in those playoffs. 9 games, 8 goals, 6 assists, 14 points. Max Bentley, added from Chicago, really chips in the playoffs. 9 games, 4 goals, 7 assists, 11 points. And Peter Horek of Detroit, 10 games, 3 goals, 7 assists, 10 points. Turk Broda ended up with a 2.15 goals against in those playoffs, and he's garnering himself quite the reputation as a big game goaltender during this time. But there you go. You're all caught up on the 1947-48 season. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe in the event that you've not done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.